I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where winters were mild and the loudest sound you could hear was the hum of the heater through the vents. But that winter was different. My parents, Lydia and Marcus, decided that we should go on a family camping trip to the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. They said we needed a change of scenery, some time away from the city and screens. My younger sister, Rose, was thrilled. She had always been the favorite, the one who could do no wrong in their eyes. I, on the other hand, went along mostly out of habit, not excitement. I didn't know that the trip would change everything: my family, my trust, and even my life. The drive west took 2 days. My father's old SUV hummed along the endless highways, the radio playing low jazz that seemed to fill the silence that no one wanted to break. I remember the smell of coffee and the crinkle of fast food wrappers and the way the land began to lift into mountains as we crossed into Colorado. Rose spent most of the trip snapping pictures of herself and posting them online, while my parents whispered about something I couldn't quite catch. When I asked what they were talking about, they smiled too quickly and said, "Just plans for the camp setup." By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was melting into the horizon, painting the peaks in orange and violet. The air was sharp and dry, the kind that burned your lungs when you breathed too fast. We pitched our tent near a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. A narrow stream cut through the snow a few yards away, its surface thinly frozen. The stars came out early, scattered and bright, like someone had thrown silver dust across the black sky. I had never seen stars like that before. In Ohio, the sky was always too clouded with city light. For a brief moment, I felt peace, cold, quiet peace. The next morning, I woke to the sound of boots crunching outside the tent. When I peeked out, I saw my parents standing a few yards away, facing each other, their hands moving in quick gestures. They weren't pointing at anything or adjusting the gear. It looked like they were talking in signs, their faces tight with concentration. When I stepped out and asked what they were doing, they stopped abruptly. My mother smiled, that too smooth smile that never reached her eyes, and said, "Just deciding where to hike today, honey." My father added, "You stay here and get the fire going. We'll take a short walk up the ridge." Something about the way they said it didn't sit right with me. Their voices were gentle, but their eyes avoided mine. Rose was still asleep, curled up in her bright pink sleeping bag, her phone clutched in her hand like a treasure. I thought about waking her, but decided against it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe my parents really did just want to walk. They left, and the forest swallowed them. I remember sitting by the fire pit, stirring the embers and feeling a strange stillness in the air. Even the birds had gone quiet. A faint wind came down from the mountain, carrying a deep, muffled sound, like thunder far away, but heavier. I stood up and turned toward the slope, shading my eyes. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. The white of the mountain seemed to shift, like it was alive. Then I realized the snow itself was moving. A rumble built in my chest, and before I could even scream, the world exploded into sound and motion. The avalanche came down in a roaring wall, the kind of power that erases everything in its path. Snow, ice, and rock tore through the valley, ripping trees out of the ground. I tried to run, but my boots sank deep, and before I could take 2 steps, something slammed into me. A log, a gust, I couldn't tell, and I was thrown into a swirl of white. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and felt snow press over me like a living thing. The world went silent. There was no sound, no air, no light, only the heavy weight of the snow above me. I tried to move, but the cold was crushing, my chest tight with panic. I couldn't tell which way was up. My breath fogged in front of my face, forming a tiny pocket of warmth that began to shrink. I thought, this is how it feels to die. My mind went blank, except for one clear memory. Grandpa Arthur's voice, calm and steady, telling me when I was a child, "If you ever get lost, keep still and listen. The world will tell you where to go." So I listened. Faintly, I heard dripping water somewhere above me. I used my hands to dig toward the sound, slow and steady. The snow fought back, but I didn't stop. My arms burned, My fingers went numb, and my heartbeat felt like thunder in my ears. When the first sliver of light appeared, it felt like waking up. I pushed harder, and suddenly the snow gave way. I pulled myself out, gasping, the air slicing into my lungs. Everything was gone. The tent, the stove, the bags buried or shattered. The mountain looked scraped clean, its surface smooth and new, as if nothing had ever stood there. I called out, "Mom? Dad?" But the sound bounced back, hollow and small. I yelled again, louder this time, but there was no answer, no movement, no footprints. Just silence. I don't remember how long I wandered. The sun had sunk behind the peaks, and a pink haze hung over the snow. I followed the narrow creek downhill, hoping it would lead me to a road. My legs felt like glass, my lips cracked from the cold. I stumbled often, each fall stealing more of my strength. My thoughts began to blur, but one kept circling back. Why had my parents walked away right before the avalanche? Why had they smiled like that? By the time I reached the edge of a plowed road, the stars were out again, faint and far away. A red pickup truck came around the bend, its headlights blinding in the snow. I waved weakly, half expecting it to pass by, but it slowed and stopped. The driver jumped out, a man with a gray beard and kind eyes. "Good God," he said. "Are you all right?" "I think so," I managed to whisper. My voice cracked. He wrapped a blanket around me, helped me into the warm cab, and handed me a thermos of coffee. His name was Noah Green, a local who worked as a maintenance driver for the county. As the truck rumbled toward Ouray, he told me I was lucky. An avalanche that size could bury a house, let alone a camp. I nodded, too tired to speak. The warmth of the heater made my body ache, as feeling returned to my fingers. When we reached the small clinic, Noah told the nurse my name and waited until I was inside before he drove off. I watched the taillights disappear into the dark. A nurse pressed a hot compress to my hands, and the doctor said I'd have bruising but no frostbite. I should have felt relief. I should have been grateful. But all I could think, even as I lay under a warm blanket, was that something wasn't right. My parents had known something. They had walked away just before the mountain broke. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought followed me down. I survived something I was never meant to survive. The ride back to Columbus, Ohio, took longer than I remembered. My hands still shook from the cold that had soaked into my bones in the mountains. I sat near the window of the bus, watching snow gather at the corners of the glass as the roads blurred past. The other passengers looked sleepy and unaware of how strange it felt to be alive after expecting not to be. I kept replaying the sound of the avalanche, the roar, the silence that followed, and the image of my parents walking away just before it struck. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence that they hadn't known. But deep inside me, something had already cracked. When I finally reached Maple Street, everything looked almost the same. The snow-dusted hedges, the mailbox with its dent from last summer, the crooked porch light my father never fixed. The white house with its black door stood calm and harmless, as if nothing dark could live inside. Grandpa Arthur had paid half its mortgage before he died. He used to say it was the only place he truly felt at peace after moving back from Boston. I had been the one to help him through those final months, his medicine, his tea, his endless stories about the sea. He used to look at me and smile, saying, "You're the steady one, Clara. The world needs steady hearts." I wished he were there now. When I reached the porch, I expected silence. Instead, I heard laughter. Music spilled through the windows, an old swing tune that didn't fit the hour or the season. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, before pushing it open. The warmth hit me first, then the smell of bread and something sweet, maybe cake. I stepped inside and stopped. The dining room was full of people, our neighbors, my parents, my sister Rose, all laughing and raising glasses. My mother wore a silver dress that glittered under the light. My father had on a tie with tiny sailboats. They looked happy. At the center of the table was a cake shaped like a mountain. I stared at it, confused, until I saw the words written across it in blue icing. "Farewell, Clara." My chest went hollow. They hadn't seen me yet. I stood in the shadow of the hallway and listened. My father's voice carried over the music. It's settled then. The Avalanche did the work. We can file on Monday. My mother laughed softly, the kind of laugh she used when she got what she wanted. To the estate, she said, raising her glass. More than $1.3 million finally. The guests clinked their glasses. Even Rose smiled, though her eyes were on her phone. I saw her type something, her lips curving into that smug half-smile she always wore when the attention was on her. For a long moment, I just stood there numb. Then something inside me, something that had been quiet for years, rose up. I stepped into the light. To the estate? I said, my voice clear. To me, the music stopped. My mother's hand froze midair, and the knife she was holding slipped from her fingers, landing on the table with a dull tap. My father turned, his face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost. Rose looked up from her phone, her jaw falling open. I'm not dead, I said. But you knew the snow would come. No one spoke. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Then my mother's expression changed. First shock, then calculation. Clara, she whispered. My God, how did you survive? How do you think? I asked. I dug my way out. I walked for hours in the snow. A man found me, helped me to a clinic. I stared at her, searching her face for guilt. There was none. Only annoyance, faint but real. My father stepped forward, forcing a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Sweetheart, you must be confused. You were caught in a terrible accident. We thought. Don't, I said. Don't lie to me. You knew there was going to be an avalanche. He froze. My mother's fingers twitched around her wine glass, and I noticed her wedding ring glinting in the light, Grandpa's old diamond, resized to fit her. It felt wrong, seeing it on her hand. She set the glass down carefully and said, You've been through a trauma, Clara. Maybe you misunderstood. We would never what? I interrupted. Never send me to die so you could take the money Grandpa left me? A few of the guests gasped. My father's eyes flicked toward them, then back at me. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. That's not true. Where would you even get that idea? I heard you, I said. You just said it. The Avalanche did the work. Those were your words. The silence that followed was like glass, sharp and waiting to break. Rose stood up slowly. You're scaring everyone, she said. You should go upstairs, take a shower, and sleep. You look awful. Her tone was soft, but her eyes were cold. The same coldness I'd seen for years whenever Grandpa praised me instead of her. I turned to her. You knew too, didn't you? She didn't answer. She only looked at our parents, her silence enough. The neighbors began to leave quietly, one by one, murmuring awkward goodbyes. By the time the door shut behind the last of them, it was just us. The four of us. The broken family. I thought I'd escaped for good. My mother's voice snapped the air. You listen to me, Clara. You can't come in here accusing us like this. We thought you were gone. We were mourning you. With champagne? I asked. With a cake? She flinched. My father sat down heavily, rubbing his face. You don't understand, Clara, he muttered. You were always… What? The mistake? The problem? I said. I know. I heard it my whole life. But Grandpa saw me differently. He left everything to me because I was the one who stayed with him when you two didn't care enough to visit. My mother's jaw tightened. He was confused. You manipulated him. I held his hand when he couldn't walk anymore. I snapped. That's not manipulation. Rose shifted in her seat, looking small now. My father looked at me like he wanted to speak, but my mother cut him off with a glare. You can't prove any of this, she said quietly. I smiled then, though it felt more like a wound than a smile. Maybe not yet, I said. But I will. I turned and walked out, the cold night air slapping my face as I stepped onto the porch. Behind me, I could hear my mother's voice rising in panic, my father's trying to calm her, Rose crying softly, or pretending to. I didn't look back. The snow on the street was fresh and unmarked. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold, thinking of Grandpa's words again. The world needs steady hearts. I wasn't steady yet, but I was alive. And that, for now, was enough. I didn't sleep much that night. The sound of the wind brushing against the old windows of the house on Maple Street felt like whispers I didn't want to hear. I locked my door and pushed a chair under the knob just in case. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moment I walked into my own wake. The look on my parents' faces, shock giving way to fury, was burned into me. I was alive, but I wasn't safe. At dawn, the snow outside glowed pale pink in the light of the rising sun. I packed a small bag, moving quietly so no one would wake. I didn't want another confrontation. I tucked Grandpa Arthur's pocket watch, one of the few things they hadn't taken, into my coat pocket. It was heavy and cool against my palm, a reminder of the man who had loved me when no one else did. Then I slipped out the back door, the one that opened onto the narrow alley behind the house, and began to walk. 2 blocks away stood the office of Fiona Clark, a lawyer who had been a close friend of Grandpa's. She was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair tied neatly at her neck and eyes that looked as if they'd already seen the worst the world could offer. Her office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. When I arrived, shivering and pale, she didn't ask questions right away. She just handed me a cup of coffee and said softly, "Start from the beginning." I told her everything. The camping trip, the avalanche, waking up buried in snow, finding the house full of laughter and champagne. The words, "the avalanche," did the work. Fiona didn't interrupt. She took notes carefully, her pen steady, her face unreadable. When I finished, she turned to her computer and opened a file labeled Arthur Weston, Last Will and Testament. Grandpa's voice seemed to echo in the room as she read aloud. To my granddaughter, Clara Weston, I leave my lake house by Lake Erie, my 1972 Chevy truck, and the remainder of my estate totaling $1,317,000. For her steady care and honest love. My throat tightened. Grandpa had remembered me exactly as I was, the quiet one who stayed behind, who never stopped showing up. Fiona continued, to my son, Marcus, and his wife, Lydia, I leave the painting of the lighthouse in my study. To my granddaughter, Rose, I leave my stamp collection, in hopes that she may learn patience through detail. When Fiona looked up, her eyes were kind but sharp. He left you everything, Clara, she said. Everything that matters. I nodded slowly, the truth sinking in. My parents had known. That's why they took me to those mountains. They hadn't invited me out of love or family spirit. They'd taken me there to die. The thought made me dizzy. Fiona leaned back in her chair, thinking. I'm calling a friend of mine, she said finally. Detective Peter Lang. He works with the Cleveland Police Department. You'll want his help. An hour later, a tall man in a brown coat arrived. He had a notebook in one hand and a calm, steady voice that reminded me of Grandpa in some strange way. He listened to everything again, asking quiet questions as he jotted notes. Do you feel safe in your home right now? He asked. I shook my head. No. Not even a little. Then don't go back there, he said firmly. Do you have anywhere else to stay? I thought for a moment, then remembered Maya Brooks, one of Grandpa's church friends who lived near Cincinnati. She had always been kind to me, bringing cookies during Grandpa's illness, telling me I had his eyes. Fiona called her, and within the hour, Maya said I could stay as long as I needed. By evening, I was sitting in Maya's cozy yellow house, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like sunshine. She made me soup and didn't ask for details, only said, You're safe now, Clara. Whatever comes next, we'll face it one piece at a time. The days that followed were slow but heavy. Detective Lang began his investigation quietly, collecting evidence that I didn't even know existed. He found texts between my parents and a man named Vince Halter, a self-proclaimed weather consultant who sold early avalanche forecasts for private use. In one of the messages, my mother had written, We need confirmation before the weekend. It must look natural. Vince replied with a payment request, $4,000 transferred through a fake consulting account. My parents had bought the exact forecast that predicted the avalanche would hit that slope. Then there were the search histories on my mother's laptop. Insurance for adult child death and accident, inheritance transfer process after missing person, and even how long to wait before claiming life insurance. The evidence was a mountain of its own, built on greed instead of snow. When Fiona showed me the printed pages, I felt sick. "They really planned it," I whispered. "They didn't even hesitate." Fiona reached across the table and touched my hand. "They won't get away with it, Clara. But you must be strong now. Don't let them break you again." A few days later, Detective Lang visited Maya's house to give an update. "The district attorney's office is reviewing everything," he said. "Your parents' accounts show large withdrawals and deposits that match the payment schedules. There's no question they knew about the Avalanche in advance." He paused before continuing. "They might claim it was a coincidence or panic, but with the will and the party, well, it paints a clear picture." I nodded. "So what happens now?" "We'll file for charges: attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. You'll need to testify when the time comes." The words, attempted murder, hung in the air like a fog. I had known it deep down, but hearing it said aloud made it real. That night, I cried, not from fear, but from exhaustion. I cried for the girl I'd been before, the one who thought her parents' coldness was just bad luck, not cruelty. Then I sat up, wiped my face, and opened Grandpa's old notebook that I'd found in my bag. Inside, in his slanted handwriting, he had written a single line that I'd never noticed before. "People reveal themselves most clearly in what they think they hide." Over the next week, I found a strange rhythm in Maya's quiet neighborhood. Each night, I walked the block under the soft glow of the streetlights, breathing in the cold air. The world didn't feel safe yet, but it felt honest. I was alive, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. One evening, Fiona called with news. "The judge has issued a protective order. They can't come near you. And Clara," she added, "you'll get your inheritance. It's rightfully yours." When I hung up, I went to the window and looked at the stars above the rooftops. I thought about Grandpa, about the way he used to wink and say, "The hardest truths are the ones that free you." Maybe he was right. I wasn't free yet, but I was learning. Spring came quietly to Ohio, soft and slow. The snow on the curbs melted into gray puddles, and the air smelled faintly of rain and earth. When the last of the court papers were signed, I returned to Maple Street, the house that had nearly been my grave and was now, by law and by choice, mine. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the door. Inside, silence greeted me. It wasn't the same silence of fear that had haunted me months ago, but a calm one, like a house waiting for someone to fill it again. Dust danced in the light filtering through the blinds. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the backs of chairs, the window frames. Everything my parents had once claimed now belonged to me. The thought didn't bring joy. It brought clarity. In the living room, I turned on Grandpa's brass lamp, the one he had left for me to keep the light honest. Its warm glow filled the room. "I'm home, Grandpa," I whispered. Saying it aloud steadied me. The trial had been public, though I hadn't attended. Fiona Clark, my lawyer, said my parents had confessed in pieces, claiming desperation, jealousy, and financial strain. They were sentenced to years in federal prison. Rose avoided charges, saying she hadn't known. Maybe she hadn't. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I'd stopped needing answers that hurt to hold. I spent the next week cleaning the house. I threw out what was rotten, boxed what was painful, and kept what was true. I opened the windows wide and let the cold air sweep through the rooms like forgiveness. The house began to breathe again, and so did I. I made a plan. I would sell Grandpa's Lake Erie property. It was too full of ghosts, and keep this house. I called a real estate agent, Daniel Hurst, from Cleveland. When the sale went through for $870,000, the number made me dizzy. That money wasn't just wealth, it was freedom. I decided I'd use it with care. First, I'd repair the Maple Street house, the porch, the roof, the creaking floorboards. Then I'd set aside a fund for myself, $1,000 a month toward school. I wanted to study search and rescue management, maybe in Vermont or Virginia. It made sense. I had survived what others didn't. I wanted to help those who might one day face the same terror in the mountains. The rest of the money I would dedicate to the Arthur Weston Rescue Fund, in Grandpa's name. It would help small rescue teams across America buy better equipment, thermal gear, radios, ropes. Grandpa had always said, "If you survive the storm, you owe the next traveler a path through it."
I wanted to build that path.
Life began to move in quiet rhythms again. I painted the living room a soft cream, planted herbs, mint, thyme, basil in the backyard, and fixed the porch swing. Every morning, I drank coffee there, watching the street come alive with school buses and dogs on leashes. For the first time, the sound of life didn't scare me. It reminded me I was part of something bigger. Some nights I dreamed of snow, the roar, the suffocating cold, but I woke calm, no longer trembling. The fear was fading, replaced by something else, determination. One evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to Rose. I didn't accuse her. I didn't forgive her either, not completely. I simply wrote, "When you're ready to tell the truth, to me or to yourself, my door is unlocked. I hope one day we can talk as sisters again, not rivals." Then I sealed it and sent it. I never knew if she read it, but writing it freed me. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't for the other person, it's for the one who chooses to live. By May, the city had turned green. The maple trees outside the house bloomed thick, their branches heavy with new life. I started running each morning, feeling my lungs fill with air instead of fear. Fiona came by one weekend with coffee and told me the last of the estate papers had cleared. "It's all yours now, Clara," she said with a smile. "Every dollar, every piece of land, every right to your future." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, but from possibility. I pulled out a blank notebook and began drawing a map, not of places, but of my plans. Each line stood for a goal: education, courage, kindness, and independence. I drew the borders in pencil first, then traced them in ink, solid and sure. A week later, I took my first trip alone, to Cape Cod. I'd dreamed of it since Grandpa told me about his years in Boston, about the sea that could heal if you listened long enough. I walked the quiet beaches at dawn, the wind cold against my face, the ocean murmuring its endless rhythm. A couple nearby spoke softly about Europe, about trains through France and summers in Italy. Their laughter floated across the waves. I smiled. Behind me stretched all of America, wide and fierce. The roads, the towns, the mountains that had nearly ended me, but had instead made me unbreakable. Standing there, I realized something simple and true. My story wasn't about loss, or betrayal, or even survival. It was about choice. About who I decided to become after the avalanche, after the lies, after the silence. I had chosen life. I had chosen light. When I returned to Ohio, I hung a single photo of Grandpa above the fireplace. Beneath it, I wrote on a slip of paper, "This house stands for what they tried to destroy, but couldn't." Sometimes I still hear the echo of snow in my dreams, the rush of it closing in. But I always wake up warm, the morning light spilling across my bed, and I remind myself, I made it. I am no longer the girl they wanted gone. I am the woman who walked out of the storm, who built her own home, her own map, her own name, and that is enough.